They say the American frontier was built on courage, sweat, and family. But there are families in this land whose stories were never meant to be told. Stories whispered in broken cabins, hidden in hollows where the sunlight never seemed to reach. What happens when bloodlines grow too close, when the tree of kinship bends inward and coils into itself, strangling its own roots? Tonight, we unravel one of the most disturbing family sagas in recorded history. A story so grotesque, so unnatural, that even local townsfolk refused to speak their name aloud. It begins not with wealth or power, but with poverty so crushing that family was the only currency left to spend. Two brothers, isolated and hardened by the wilderness, looked not to the world outside, but to their own sister as the answer to survival, to comfort, to legacy. Together they made a pact unspoken by law and unblessed by church, a pact that would trap generations in a cycle of deformity, madness, and shame. The sister bore children not of chance, but of design. Children who were siblings and cousins all at once, bound together in a labyrinth of shared blood, doomed before they ever drew their first breath. And yet, it didn't stop there. The line continued, branching and curling like a vine choking its own stalk. A clan was born from this twisted union, and over time, the outside world began to notice. Their faces, their mannerisms, their fractured way of living, it all carried the mark of a bloodline folded back upon itself. They became infamous not for crimes of violence, but for crimes against nature, carried quietly, hidden in plain sight. When you peel back the layers of American history, you find families like this scattered in the margins, forgotten, erased, or ridiculed in whispers. But this particular clan stands apart. They were not a rumor. They were not a single act of desperation. They were an entire lineage, spiraling downward, trapped by choices no one dared confront. Tonight, we enter their world. And once you step inside, you may never look at the meaning of family the same way again. The family lived deep in the backwoods, where dirt roads turned to mud and mud turned to silence. Their cabin sat crooked on the edge of a hollow, its timbers blackened with age, its roof sagging under the weight of decades. Outsiders who wandered too close often said the air changed near that place, heavy with the smell of smoke and rot. But the brothers and their sister had no intention of leaving. They had chosen isolation, chosen one another, chosen to create a world with walls too high for strangers to climb. The sisters' children were the first to bear the marks. Some were born frail, their bones fragile, their features oddly mirrored, like reflections that didn't quite align. Others grew strong in body, but carried an unease in their minds, a cloud that never lifted. And yet the brothers insisted this was family, that no one beyond their hollow could ever understand. Each child carried both the weight of innocence and the stain of a secret they never asked to bear. Neighbors who caught glimpses of them would later whisper of their strange movements, their vacant stares, the way their voices carried in broken echoes. Most people avoided the hollow entirely. No one wanted to linger where the natural order seemed undone. And the children grew, wandering the woods, clinging to one another in a world that had already decided they were outcasts. But what is most chilling is not the deformities, not the afflictions, not even the grotesque bond that birthed them. It is the silence. This family, locked away from the world, learned to live without words. They communicated in looks, in grunts, in guttural sounds that seemed to belong to something older, more primal than human speech. It was as though language itself had been swallowed by the weight of their bloodline. The outside world did not intervene. Authorities knew, church leaders knew, even traveling doctors knew. But poverty has a way of burying horrors beneath indifference. That's just how they live, people would say, shrugging off the truth like dust from their boots. And so the family remained in their hollow, generation after generation, their bloodline tightening like a noose around their necks. This is where the story darkens even further. For what began as a union of 3 siblings became a legacy, passed on like an heirloom no one could refuse. And once a family crosses that threshold, there is no easy way back. As the decades slipped by, the family became less a household and more a legend, a whispered warning passed between townsfolk. Children dared one another to creep near the hollow, but few ever went beyond the tree line. Those who did swore they saw faces peering from broken windows, pale and watchful, like ghosts trapped inside their own home. The brothers grew old, their bodies twisted from years of labor, but their hold on the sister never loosened. She remained at the heart of it all, not merely a victim, not merely a mother, but the unwilling matriarch of something unnatural. The children she bore grew to have children of their own, and the spiral continued. Cousins became siblings, siblings became spouses, and the roots of the tree folded back into themselves. The result was a clan unlike any other, interconnected in ways too tangled for any genealogy to map. Their last names meant nothing. Their identities were lost in the blur of repetition, as though time itself was looping inside the hollow. The town grew uneasy. Rumors turned darker. Some claimed that when the family appeared in public, their very presence was unsettling. Their eyes not quite aligned, their movements jerky, their laughter carrying an echo that felt wrong. Others swore that the family had powers, that their unnatural union had given them something eerie, a sense of knowing when outsiders spoke of them. These stories were not born from fact, but from fear. The kind of fear that festers when a truth is too uncomfortable to confront directly. Still, the family endured. They hunted, they scavenged, they lived off scraps and charity when necessary. They did not beg, but neither did they integrate. They survived in the cracks of society, in the shadows of America's progress, and in that survival, they built a wall of silence so thick that even death seemed unable to breach it. It is said that a Eiley's history is carried in its stories, but this clan's history was carried in their bodies, in the slope of a forehead, the tremor of a hand, the hollow look in their eyes. They did not need to tell their story aloud. They wore it in every gesture, every sound, every breath. By now, the family was no longer just surviving an accident of birth. They were sustaining a cycle, one passed down deliberately, whether out of fear of outsiders, or a belief that the world beyond their hollow was more dangerous than what they had created within it. That choice, generation after generation, sealed their fate. By the turn of the century, the family had become something more than flesh and bone. They were an omen. Their name was spoken in hushed tones at church gatherings, in taverns, around firesides, always softened by a nervous glance over the shoulder. Outsiders could not believe such people existed in modern America. Yet those who lived nearest to the hollow knew better. They had seen the children shuffle through the trees, barefoot even in the snow, their hair matted, their eyes darting like cornered animals. They had heard the strange sounds at night, low, guttural calls that carried through the valley, neither words nor cries, something between human and beast. The brothers had long since withered, their bodies broken by time, but the damage they set in motion spread, unchecked. Their sister, the reluctant nucleus of it all, faded quietly into the background. She was no longer remembered as a person, but as the vessel through which a bloodline was warped forever. Her children grew old, their children bore more children, and the cycle deepened into something that could no longer be untangled. Doctors who visited the region would later write of what they saw. They did not use names. They hid behind clinical descriptions. Words like genetic abnormality, cognitive impairment, familial isolation. But these were just cold terms for a reality that was far more haunting. For what they witnessed was not simply illness, it was inheritance. Every child carried forward the weight of a decision made long before they were born, and with each new generation, the line blurred further between accident and inevitability. Some families passed down heirlooms, stories, songs. This family passed down silence, deformity, and an unshakable reminder of what happens when the walls of kinship close in too tightly. Their world became a mirror warped beyond recognition, reflecting not what it meant to be human, but what it meant to be trapped by blood. The deeper you study their history, the more unsettling it becomes. For this was not a single lapse in morality, not one moment of weakness or desperation. It was a system, an unspoken agreement, continued long after the original three had gone. A family tree that turned inward and strangled itself until the branches no longer reached toward the sun. And in this dark corner of American soil, their story continued to unfold, unseen, unspoken, but never entirely forgotten. If you've stayed with me this far, you're already braver than most, because what comes next is not just history, it is a glimpse into the depths of what blood can do when trapped in a cycle without escape. And I have to ask you, if this had been your family, your bloodline, what would you have done? Would you have broken free, or would you have been pulled back into the hollow, just like the rest? Tell me in the comments. The truth is, by the mid-20th century, the clan had become an open secret. Journalists, social workers, and even law enforcement knew of their existence. Some made attempts to intervene, but those attempts always fell short. Poverty was the shield that kept them untouchable. In a land where people could barely feed themselves, where dirt roads swallowed cars whole, the problems of one strange family did not demand priority, and so they were left alone, tucked away in the forgotten folds of the American landscape. When outsiders did cross paths with them, the encounters were rarely forgotten. Some recalled the way they spoke only in fragments, half words, half sounds, communication reduced to something raw and unsettling. Others remembered their faces, expressions caught somewhere between innocence and menace, eyes that stared too long, as if they were looking not at you but through you. These meetings spread by word of mouth, shaping a reputation that was both pitiful and terrifying. Generations passed, but the pattern did not break. Cousins, married cousins, brothers and sisters blurred into indistinguishable roles. The children born of these unions became living proof of choices made long before they could understand what family was supposed to mean. Some bore obvious deformities, jaws that jutted at unnatural angles, limbs that never formed correctly. Others carried hidden afflictions, minds clouded, thoughts fragmented, as though language and logic had been eroded from within. And yet, despite it all, the family endured. They were survivors in the purest, most haunting sense. No matter how far society moved forward, no matter how advanced medicine and technology became, this clan held fast to their hollow. They did not vanish. They did not disappear. They carried their secret with them, and in doing so, they became a mirror reflecting the side of humanity we are most afraid to face, the part where love, survival, and blood twist into something monstrous. By the time the outside world could no longer ignore them, the family had already become a kind of living relic, proof of what happens when the rules of society collapse, when isolation swallows morality whole. Investigators, researchers, and even filmmakers would eventually descend upon their hollow, documenting what generations of neighbors had long whispered. What they found was not just a family, but a portrait of human collapse. Men and women who barked and grunted instead of speaking, who stared blankly into the distance, who laughed at nothing as though their minds had been left unfinished. The reports that emerged were clinical, but the reality they described was something closer to horror. Entire branches of the family had no concept of language, no awareness of time, no memory beyond the immediate. And yet, within that chaos, there was a strange kind of order. They cared for one another in their own way, feeding, sheltering, and protecting those who could not survive alone. It was family, distorted, broken, but still bound by ties of blood and duty. The most haunting truth was that the original sin, the union of two brothers and one sister, still echoed in every generation that followed. Their faces bore the unmistakable marks of entangled DNA, their behaviors a reflection of centuries of choices folded back upon themselves. These people were not monsters by nature, but by inheritance. And perhaps that is what makes their story so terrifying. They were born into a curse they did not choose, a fate sealed before their first breath. America prides itself on progress, on overcoming hardship, on pushing forward through history. But hidden in its shadows are families like this, families that reveal a darker truth, that not everyone moved forward, that some were left behind to spiral into something almost unrecognizable. And while society points and whispers call in, them freaks, abominations, or curiosities, The more uncomfortable truth is that they are the inevitable result of neglect, silence, and abandonment. The family did not choose this path alone. They were trapped by poverty, by isolation, and by the indifference of those who looked away. And in that silence, their bloodline turned in on itself until the children born from it became walking testaments to what humanity becomes when it is left to rot in the shadows. The story of this family does not end with a clean conclusion. There was no moment when the cycle simply stopped, no single act of redemption that broke the chain. Instead, their bloodline dissolved slowly, fading into obscurity as the outside world advanced and their hollow grew quieter. Some members were institutionalized, others taken in by distant relatives, and some remained in the ruins of that cabin until the very end. What was left behind was not just a family tree bent into grotesque shapes, it was a warning. The brothers and their sister are long gone now, their names nearly erased from record, but their legacy lingers like an echo. The photographs that survive show faces both human and haunting, vacant stares, slack jaws, bodies shaped by something deeper than chance. To look at them is to confront the truth of what happens when family turns inward, when the boundaries of kinship collapse into something unholy. These images are not just evidence, they are a mirror, daring us to ask how thin the line is between survival and destruction. Historians, doctors, and curious strangers will continue to unearth their story, piecing together fragments, trying to understand how such a clan could endure for so long in plain sight. But the answer is simple, and it is unsettling, because no one wanted to face it. It was easier to laugh at them, to whisper about them, to call them monsters, than to ask what role society played in letting them fester in isolation. Their existence was not just the result of their own choices, but of neglect, proof of what can grow when a people are abandoned, ignored, and left to spiral in silence. In the end, the family became more than their own tragedy. They became a shadow cast across the American landscape, a reminder that progress always has its blind spots, its forgotten corners. They remind us that blood, once twisted, cannot untwist it itself. That some legacies are not of honor or pride, but of quiet horror, passed down not in words but in faces, in gestures, in the very shape of human life. When you leave this story behind, remember this. Some families build empires, some build traditions, and some, like this one, build warnings. And sometimes the darkest truths of history are not written in books or carved into monuments. They are born in the silence of a hollow, where two brothers and one sister made a choice that still echoes long after their voices have gone quiet.